Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku's quirk let him enter people's dreams and steal their fears. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in Aldera Junior High was always stale, thick with the scent of chalk dust, cheap disinfectant, and the simmering stew of adolescent anxiety. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a smell he knew better than the clean air of his own all-might-themed bedroom. He was a connoisseur of the subtle notes of human emotion that lingered in a room long after its occupants had left. He could smell the bitter tang of disappointment after a failed test, the cloying sweetness of a first crush, and the sharp, metallic scent of fear. Today, the fear was his own. Since you're all third years, it's time for you to think seriously about your futures, the teacher said, his voice a droning monotone that suggested he'd given up on his own future sometime around the dawn of the hero age. He tossed a stack of papers into the air. I'll be handing out these career aspiration forms, but why bother? I know you all want to be heroes, the classroom erupted. Quirks flared in a chaotic display of youthful exuberance. A girl with extendable fingers snatched a paper from the air. A boy with rocks for knuckles pounded his desk, leaving a fine gray powder on the wood. It was a symphony of potential, and Izuku sat in the dead center of it, a silent, quirkless void. He hunched over his desk, trying to make himself smaller, trying to become invisible. He scribbled furiously in his notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13, a nervous habit that had become his only shield. Yes, you've all got some impressive quirks, the teacher droned on, a lazy smile on his face. But no using quirks in school! A familiar, explosive voice cut through the noise like a crack of lightning. Teach! Don't lump me in with these losers, Katsuki Bakugo. He was leaning back in his chair, feet propped on his desk, a sneer plastered across his face that was as much a part of him as the nitroglycerin-like sweat that beaded on his palms. I'm the real deal, Bakugo snarled, his voice a low growl of absolute confidence. The rest of these extras will be lucky to end up as sidekicks to some busted D-lister. I'm UA material. I aced the mock exam. I'm the only one here with the stuff to make it. The teacher shuffled through his papers. Oh, that's right. Bakugo, you're aiming for UA, aren't you? Murmurs rippled through the classroom. UA was the pinnacle, the stuff of legends. That's why he's called an extra, Bakugo said, his crimson eyes scanning the room with disdain. I'm not just aiming for it. I'm going to surpass All Might himself and become the #1 hero, not to mention the richest. He punctuated the declaration by slamming his fist on his desk, and for a moment, Izuku felt a strange pressure behind his own eyes. It was a familiar sensation, a faint thrumming static that seemed to emanate from Bakugo whenever his ambition burned brightest. Izuku had always dismissed it as a headache, but it felt different. Like listening to a radio station just barely out of tune, a broadcast of pure, unadulterated ego. The teacher, still looking at his clipboard, broke the moment. Oh, Midoriya, you're trying for UA too, aren't you? The world stopped. The low hum of chatter died instantly. Every head in the room swiveled to face him. Izuku felt his blood run cold. He could feel the collective weight of their disbelief, a physical pressure on his chest. He shrank down so far he thought he might phase through his chair. A beat of stunned silence. Then, the explosion. Laughter. It wasn't cheerful or teasing, it was cruel, sharp, and mocking. It hit him in waves, each one more painful than the last. Midoriya? No way, you can't get into the hero course just by studying. He's quirkless. What can he even do? DKU! Bakugo's roar silenced everyone else. He moved so fast Izuku barely saw it, a blur of motion ending with an explosive blast that sent Izuku's desk flying. The wooden surface splintered, and Izuku was thrown backward, landing on the floor with a painful thud. He looked up into Bakugo's furious, merciless eyes. Smoke curled from Bakugo's palm, carrying the acrid scent of burned sugar. You're below the rejects. You're quirkless. Bakugo loomed over him, a predator cornering its prey. How can you even think of standing in the same ring as me? And no, wait, Kaken! Izuku stammered, scrambling backward on his hands. I'm not trying to compete with you. I swear! It's been my dream since I was little. And, well, there's no rule against trying. Trying? Bakugo's voice was a blade. He snatched the notebook from Izuku's fallen desk. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. What's this crap, Deku? Give it back! Izuku yelped, a pathetic sound even to his own ears. Bakugo simply smirked, then pressed his palms together on either side of the book. A deafening crackle-boom echoed through the room. The notebook erupted in a brief, brilliant flash of light. When Bakugo pulled his hands away, the cover was charred black, the edges smoking. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it out the open window. Izuku gasped, a strangled, hopeless sound. Bakugo leaned in close, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that was somehow more terrifying than his shouting. The best heroes showed signs of greatness even as students. I'll be the first and only hero from this crappy, backwater school. The story of my origin. And you know what they'll say about you, Deku? He poked a finger into Izuku's chest hard. They'll say you're a stepping stone for the rest of us. A nobody. He turned to leave, his cronies trailing behind him like hyenas. At the door, he paused and looked back over his shoulder. You know, he said, his tone chillingly casual. If you want to be a hero so badly, there's a quick way to do it. Believe that you'll have a quirk in your next life, and take a swan dive off the roof. The static in Izuku's head wasn't static anymore. It was a roar, a tidal wave of Bakugo's rage, arrogance, and something else, something darker and colder that Izuku couldn't name. It clung to the air, thick and suffocating. Izuku could only sit there on the floor, trembling, the laughter of his classmates ringing in his ears long after they had gone. He found the notebook later, floating in the koi pond outside. The fish, brilliant orange and white, nudged at the waterlogged, burnt cover as if it were some strange new form of algae. He fished it out, cradling the ruined collection of his hopes and dreams in his hands. It was pathetic. He was pathetic. The walk home was a blur of familiar sights rendered alien by the depth of his despair. He saw heroes in action, Kamui Woods fighting a purse snatcher, Mount Lady making her debut, and felt nothing but a hollow ache where excitement used to be. Can I be a hero without a quirk? All Might's voice, from that old video he'd watched 1,000 times, echoed in his mind. Yes, you can. But the video was old, and All Might had been smiling for the cameras. Today, reality had given him a different answer. He clutched the damp, scorched notebook to his chest. He could feel the ghost of Bakugo's touch on it, the lingering heat from the explosion, the faint, almost imperceptible charge of his energy. It was a strange comfort, a tangible link to the person who defined his life through opposition. Back in his room, a shrine to All Might, the hero's smiling face seemed to mock him from every poster. Izuku sat at his desk, carefully prying open the stiff, waterlogged pages of his notebook. The ink had run, turning his meticulous analyses into blurry, abstract paintings of failure. He tried to dry the pages with a towel, his movements slow and methodical, a desperate act of preservation. He was so tired. The emotional weight of the day pressed down on him, a physical exhaustion that seeped into his bones. His eyelids felt like lead. He didn't bother changing out of his uniform. He just lay down on his bed, the ruined notebook resting on his chest like a tombstone. As he drifted off, his fingers unconsciously curled around the burnt cover, a last point of contact with the day's trauma. The smell of burnt paper and pond water filled his senses, with an undercurrent of something else, something that smelled like caramel and fury. And then, he dreamt. It wasn't a gentle slide into sleep. It was a fall. A sudden, stomach-lurching plunge into absolute darkness, silent and cold. He didn't feel his bed beneath him, or his blankets around him. There was only the sensation of falling, faster and faster, through an endless, inky void. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. Panic seized him, cold and sharp. He landed without impact. One moment he was falling, the next he was standing. His feet were on cold, cracked linoleum. He blinked, his eyes struggling to adjust. He was in a hallway. A school hallway. Aldera. But it was wrong, terribly wrong. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. The air was frigid, raising goosebumps on his arms. The rows of lockers that lined the hall were rusted and warped, their doors slightly ajar like gaping mouths. Some were dented inward, as if something enormously powerful had tried to crush them. A slow, rhythmic drip, 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 echoed from somewhere down the hall, each drop sounding less like water and more like a thick, syrupy liquid hitting the floor. He was alone. "Hello?" he called out, his voice small and thin in the oppressive silence. It didn't echo. The sound was simply swallowed by the shadows. A wave of dread washed over him, so potent it was almost nauseating. This wasn't his dream. He dreamt of heroes, of flying through the sky, of All Might giving him a thumbs up. This place was a mausoleum of anxiety, and he felt like an intruder. He took a tentative step forward, his shoes making a gritty sound on the floor. He peered into one of the open lockers. Inside, instead of books and gym clothes, there was a single, pristine UA acceptance letter, torn perfectly in half. In the next locker, a hero trophy was melting like wax. Each one contained a small, perfect diorama of failure. He had to get out. He turned and ran, his footsteps echoing unnaturally now, loud and clumsy. The hallway stretched before him, elongating like taffy, the exit door seeming to recede with every step he took. Panic began to claw at his throat. This was a nightmare. A classic, textbook nightmare. Then he heard it. A whimper. It was faint, almost lost beneath the dripping sound, but it was undeniably human. He skidded to a stop, straining his ears. It came from a classroom just ahead, the door slightly ajar. Driven by an instinct he didn't know he possessed, he pushed the door open. The room was a warped reflection of their homeroom. Desks were overturned, and the blackboard was covered in frantic, clawed chalk marks that looked like incomprehensible equations of despair. Huddled in the far corner, half hidden behind a teacher's podium, was a small figure. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. It was Bakugo, but it wasn't the Bakugo he knew. This version looked younger, smaller. His usual arrogant sneer was gone, replaced by a mask of stark terror. His hands, the source of his explosive power, were pressed against his mouth to stifle his sobs. He was staring at the doorway, not at Izuku, but past him, as if expecting something terrible to come through. "Keikaken?" Izuku whispered. Bakugo's head snapped toward him. His crimson eyes were wide with a fear so pure and undiluted that Izuku had never seen it on him before. It was the fear of a child who knows a monster is hiding under his bed. "Deku?" Bakugo's voice was a choked, disbelieving whisper. "What are you doing here? You can't be here. He'll find you too." "He? Who?" Before Bakugo could answer, a shadow fell across the doorway, eclipsing the flickering light from the hall. The dripping sound stopped. A profound silence descended, heavy and absolute. Izuku turned slowly, a primal fear seizing his own heart. Standing in the doorway was a figure that was both familiar and utterly monstrous. It had the shape of All Might, the iconic V-shaped hair antennae, the towering physique, the broad shoulders. But it was made of shadow, a deep, featureless black that seemed to drink the light from the room. Its perpetual, beaming smile was there, but it was a gash of gleaming white in the darkness, stretched too wide, filled with too many teeth. It wasn't a smile of reassurance. It was the predatory grin of a wolf. The figure took a step into the room. It didn't walk. It glided, silent and unnerving. "I am here," it boomed, and the voice was a horrific parody of All Might's. It was distorted, layered with a mocking echo that vibrated in Izuku's bones. Behind him, Bakugo let out a choked cry of terror. The shadow All Might's head swiveled, its empty gaze fixing on Bakugo. It raised a hand, pointing a finger that was too long, too sharp. "A new challenger has appeared," the voice bellowed, laced with cruel laughter. "You are next. To prove your worth." The figure moved, its form blurring. It was suddenly in front of Bakugo, who was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The shadow creature leaned down, its horrifying smile inches from Bakugo's face. "You have such potential," it whispered, the praise dripping with poison. "The potential to be the greatest failure of all." This was it. Izuku felt a sickening jolt of recognition. This was Bakugo's deepest, most secret fear, personified. The fear of not being good enough. The terror of his own ambition turning against him, a specter of All Might, his idol, pronouncing him a fraud. Something inside Izuku snapped. He didn't know how he was here, or why. All he knew was that he was watching his childhood friend, his tormentor, his rival, be psychologically flayed by a monster born of his own mind. And he couldn't stand it. "Leave him alone!" Izuku shouted, his voice cracking. The Shadow All Might's head rotated 180 degrees with an audible crack of metaphysical bone, its grinning void face now fixed on him. "An extra!" It hissed, a sound like grinding stone. "Irrelevant." The monster turned its attention back to Bakugo, who was trembling uncontrollably. "I am not a failure," Bakugo stammered, his voice barely a squeak. "I'm going to be number one. A true hero wouldn't be hiding in a corner." The shadow mocked. "A true hero would have already won." It reached out a shadowy hand, the fingers elongating into claws, reaching for Bakugo's face. That was the trigger. "Kaken, run!" Izuku screamed. The sound of his own voice seemed to break the spell. Bakugo flinched, then scrambled away, kicking over a desk. The monster swiped, its claws leaving deep gouges in the floor where Bakugo had been a second before. They ran. They burst out into the twisted hallway, the Shadow All Might gliding silently and effortlessly behind them. "Where are we going?" Bakugo yelled, his voice laced with panic but with a spark of his usual fire returning. "I don't know," Izuku yelled back. "It's your dream." "My dream?" Bakugo spared a glance at him, his expression a chaotic mix of terror and confusion. The hallway twisted ahead of them. The walls seemed to breathe, closing in. They sprinted past the warped lockers, whose open doors now snapped shut like bear traps as they passed. The dripping sound was back, faster now, a frantic, panicked heartbeat. The monster was gaining. Its shadow stretched along the floor, flowing like black water, about to engulf them. "This way!" Izuku shouted, grabbing Bakugo's arm and pulling him into the gymnasium. The contact sent a bizarre jolt through him, a flash of shared terror, a brief, dizzying insight into the sheer, suffocating pressure Bakugo put on himself every single day. The gym was a nightmare arena. The basketball hoops were hung with nooses, and the climbing ropes snaked across the floor like dead serpents. In the center of the room, a massive scoreboard glowed with crimson light, displaying only one word: failure. The Shadow All Might appeared in the doorway, blocking their only exit. It spread its arms wide, its smile stretching until it seemed to split its face. "Nowhere left to run, young hero," it crooned. "Time for your final exam." Bakugo backed away, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was cornered. His fear was a palpable thing, a scent in the air that seemed to make the monster bigger, darker, more solid. Izuku watched, his mind racing, his analytical brain clicking into gear despite his own terror. He noticed it then. When Bakugo cowered, the shadow grew. When he ran, the shadow stretched. The monster was feeding on his fear. It was made of it. If fear made it strong, then what would courage do? "Kaken, stop," Izuku said, his voice surprisingly steady. Bakugo shot him a look of pure disbelief. "Are you insane, Deku? It's going to kill us." "It can't kill us. It's not real," Izuku insisted, stepping forward to stand between Bakugo and the monster. His own knees were knocking together, but he stood his ground. "It's just a shadow. It's the part of you that's scared you won't live up to your own hype." The Shadow All Might tilted its head, its grin faltering for a fraction of a second. "Silence, pest. You're wrong about him," Izuku shouted at the creature, his voice gaining strength. "He's not a failure. He's arrogant, and he's a jerk, and he's mean, but he's not a failure. He's stronger than anyone I know." He glanced back at Bakugo. "It's feeding on your fear, Kaken. Don't give it what it wants. Fight back." For a moment, Bakugo just stared at him, at this useless, quirkless Deku who was lecturing him on courage inside his own nightmare. The sheer absurdity of it, the absolute, idiotic bravery of it, seemed to cut through his terror. A flicker of his old self ignited in his eyes. "A hero's spirit is unbreakable," the monster boomed, lunging forward. "Then don't break," Izuku yelled. This time, Bakugo didn't run. He stood his ground. He let out a roar, a genuine, furious Bakugo roar, and kicked a stray basketball at the monster's face. The ball passed right through the shadow, But the act of defiance had an immediate effect. The monster flinched. Its form flickered, becoming slightly more transparent. Its manic grin tightened. It worked. See? Izuku urged. It's weak. A savage grin, the real one, spread across Bakugo's face. The fear was still there, but it was now overshadowed by his true nature, pure, unadulterated battle lust. You think you can scare me? Bakugo bellowed at the creature, picking up a fallen vaulting horse. You're just a cheap copy. He heaved the heavy equipment with a grunt, throwing it at the shadow. Again, it passed through, but the monster's form wavered violently, like a television signal breaking up. I am possible. The Shadow All Might rasped, its voice losing its booming quality. I'm going to be the #1 hero. Bakugo screamed, his voice raw with conviction. I'm going to surpass All Might. And no pathetic, second-rate ghost in my head is going to tell me I can't, he charged. He didn't have his quirk, but he ran at the monster with his fists raised, a primal scream tearing from his throat. The Shadow All Might shrieked, a high-pitched, static sound, and recoiled from Bakugo's oncoming courage. It shrank, its form dissolving, the darkness bleeding away. The oppressive atmosphere in the gym began to lift. The nooses on the hoops turned back into nets. The scoreboard flickered and went dark. The world was coming apart. Izuku felt a powerful pulling sensation, like he was being dragged backward through water. He saw Bakugo's fist connect with the last wisp of the dissipating shadow, and then everything dissolved into a blinding white light. Izuku woke with a violent gasp, lurching upright in his bed. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Cold sweat drenched his uniform, plastering it to his skin. He was breathing in harsh, ragged gulps, his lungs burning. He looked around his room, his eyes wide and frantic. All Might posters. All Might figurines. His desk. His computer. Everything was normal. Safe. He was in his room. He was awake. He collapsed back onto his pillow, his body trembling with phantom adrenaline. A dream, he whispered, his voice hoarse. It was just a dream, but it hadn't felt like one. It felt more real than the waking world. He could still feel the cold of the linoleum, smell the rust of the lockers, hear the mocking echo of the shadow's voice. He could still feel the jolt of grabbing Bakugo's arm, that brief, shocking window into his soul. He sat up again, his eyes falling on the object resting on his stomach. The ruined notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. He picked it up. It was still damp, still smelled of pond water and ash, but as he held it, he could have sworn he detected another, fainter scent. Caramel and nitroglycerin. Kakin scent. His blood ran cold. He scrambled out of bed and went to his desk, turning on his computer. He frantically typed. Shared dreams, entering someone's mind, dream quirks. The results were sparse, fringe science, crackpot theories, and a few rare, unconfirmed quirks that allowed for mild telepathic suggestion during sleep. Nothing like what he had experienced, nothing about fighting physical manifestations of fear. It had to be a dream. A stress dream brought on by the worst day of his life. He had imagined Bakugo's presence because Bakugo was the cause of his stress. He had invented the monster as a metaphor for his own feelings of inadequacy, projecting them onto his rival. It was the only logical explanation. He tried to go about his morning routine, but the feeling of unreality clung to him. He felt changed. The fear he'd felt in the dream was gone, but a different kind of anxiety had taken its place, the fear of the unknown. The fear of his own mind. School was an exercise in torture. Izuku couldn't focus on a single word the teacher said. His attention was fixed on the back of Katsuki Bakugo's head. He watched him with a mixture of dread and morbid curiosity, waiting for the inevitable explosion. He was sure Bakugo would corner him, slam him against a locker, and demand to know why he was in his head. But the explosion never came. Bakugo was quiet. Dangerously quiet. He didn't sneer or snarl. He didn't mock the extras or brag about his future. He just sat at his desk, staring out the window, his shoulders slumped in a way Izuku had never seen before. There were dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept at all. The bell rang for lunch. Izuku packed his things, his movements stiff and jerky. He had to get out of there. He turned to leave, and his path took him right past Bakugo's desk. He held his breath, bracing for impact. Bakugo stood up. He turned, and for a split second, their eyes met. Izuku saw it again, not the usual rage, but a flicker of that same deep, unsettling confusion from the dream. It was a look that said, "I saw you." Izuku's heart stopped. Bakugo walked past him without a shove, without an insult, without even a grunt. But as he passed, his shoulder brushing Izuku's, he spoke. His voice was a low, gravelly murmur, so quiet that Izuku almost missed it. "Stay out of my head, Deku." And then he was gone, leaving Izuku standing frozen in the middle of the classroom. The words echoed in the sudden silence of his mind, a definitive, terrifying confirmation. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a metaphor. It was real. He had been inside Katsuki Bakugo's nightmare. He had fought a monster made of fear. He had helped him. 1,000 questions swirled in his mind, a chaotic storm of impossibility. How? Why? But one thought rose above the rest, clear and sharp and world-shattering, a thought that made him tremble not with fear, but with a terrifying, electrifying awe. I have a quirk. The world did not look different, but Izuku Midoriya saw it with new eyes. The sunlight that streamed through his window wasn't just light. It was a testament to the waking world, a barrier against the shadowy unreality he now knew existed just behind his eyelids. The familiar hum of his apartment building wasn't just background noise. It was a symphony of sleeping minds, a field of potential doorways he might now be able to open. Bakugo's whispered words, "Stay out of my head, Deku," had been a key turning a lock in his soul. The tumblers had fallen, and a door had swung open onto a terrifying and exhilarating new landscape. A quirk. He had a quirk. The two words chased each other around his mind, a frantic, joyous, horrifying mantra. After a lifetime of being defined by a lack, he was suddenly, impossibly, defined by a presence. He spent the next 2 days in a state of suspended animation, a ghost in his own life. At school, he was a silent observer, his notebook lying forgotten in his bag. Instead of analyzing heroes, he was analyzing himself, turning his obsessive focus inward. He was a puzzle, a black box of unknown function, and he attacked the problem with the only tool he had, the scientific method. Hypothesis 1. The quirk, which I'm tentatively calling dream entry, allows me to enter the dreams of others. Data point A. I entered the dream of Katsuki Bakugo. Condition A. I was asleep at the same time. Condition B. I was in physical possession of an object, the notebook, that he had recently and forcefully made contact with. This led to a new, more specific hypothesis. Hypothesis 2. Dream entry requires a link established by physical contact, either direct or through a medium. He had to test it. But how? He couldn't just go around touching people and hoping they'd fall asleep. The ethical implications made his stomach churn. Entering someone's mind without permission felt like a profound violation, a psychic form of breaking and entering. He had helped Bakugo, yes, but he had stumbled in by accident. A deliberate intrusion felt different. Darker. He sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen, the search bar blinking expectantly. What could he even search for? How to ethically test a nightmare invasion quirk? The thought was absurd. This was uncharted territory. He was the sole explorer of this strange new continent within his own DNA. His mother's voice pulled him from his reverie. "Izuku? Dinner's ready, sweetie." He went to the small dining table, his movements still stiff. Inko Midoriya smiled at him, but her eyes were clouded with the familiar haze of worry she wore like a second skin. It had been there for as long as he could remember, ever since that fateful day at the doctor's office when a single X-ray of his foot had shattered their world. "You've been so quiet these past few days," she said, placing a bowl of katsudon in front of him. His favorite. A peace offering to a sadness she couldn't understand. "Is everything all right at school? You're not being picked on again, are you?" "I'm fine, Mom." "Really?" he said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "Just thinking a lot about the future." It wasn't a total lie. He was thinking about his future, a future that had, 48 hours ago, been a barren wasteland and was now a jungle teeming with unknown possibilities and unseen dangers. Inko's smile tightened at the edges. She fussed with his chopsticks, straightened his napkin. Her love was a constant, gentle, suffocating pressure. I know you're trying so hard, Izuku. I see you studying, watching those hero videos. I'm so proud of your determination. But you have to be realistic, too. It's a dangerous world for people without. She couldn't say it. Quirkless. The word hung in the air between them, a ghost at the dinner table. He watched her as she ate, her movements small and precise. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hand as she lifted her teacup, the way her gaze would drift to him every few seconds, checking. Always checking. Was he okay? Was he eating enough? Was he breathing? Her anxiety was a living thing, a constant hum beneath the surface of their lives. It was in the overstocked first aid kit in the bathroom, the emergency contact list magnetized to the fridge, the extra bento she always packed him. Just in case. She loved him so much that it was breaking her. She worried about him with an intensity that was hollowing her out from the inside. And in that moment, Izuku knew he had a quirk. A power that, if his experience with Bakugo was any indication, could do more than just observe. He had helped Kaken face his fear. Maybe he could do more. Maybe he could not just face it, but remove it entirely. The thought was audacious, terrifying, and deeply, intoxicatingly tempting. To take the burden of her fear away. To give her peace. What greater act of heroism could there be for a son? Hypothesis 3. Dream entry allows for interaction with and potential alteration of the dreamscape and its contents. He had his test subject. The one person in the world he knew he could help without malice, the one person whose mind he would enter not as an invader, but as a liberator. His mother. Later that night, the plan felt less like a heroic mission and more like a terrible, nerve-wracking transgression. Inko was asleep on the sofa, a historical drama playing softly on the television. She drifted off while folding laundry, a common occurrence. Her face, so often etched with worry, was smooth and peaceful in sleep. A small, contented smile played on her lips. Was he about to ruin that? He stood over her, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This was it. The first intentional, deliberate test. He needed to establish the link. His hands were clammy. He wiped them on his pants, taking a deep, shuddering breath. He reached down and gently, so gently, took her hand. Her skin was soft, warm. Her fingers curled instinctively around his, even in sleep. The contact sent a jolt through him, but it was different from the one he'd felt with Bakugo. There was no static, no aggression. It was a current of pure, unconditional love, a warmth that spread up his arm and settled in his chest. And beneath it, a deep, sorrowful undercurrent of fear, a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety for his well-being. He felt a pang of guilt so sharp it almost made him pull away. He was using her love as a key to break into her most private space. But then he remembered her face at dinner, the tired lines of worry. This was for her. He retreated to his room, leaving his door slightly ajar. The link felt tenuous, a thin, silvery thread stretching between the living room and his bedroom. He lay down on his bed, still in his day clothes, his pulse thrumming in his ears. He closed his eyes, focusing on the sensation of the link, on the echo of his mother's warmth. He thought of her fear, of his desire to help. He let himself sink. Please work, he thought. Please let me help her. The fall came again. The familiar, sickening plunge into a silent, bottomless dark. But this time, he wasn't afraid. He was ready. He landed on plush carpet, thick enough to swallow all sound. The air was still and close, smelling of dust, dried lavender, and the faint, sweet scent of old paper. He was in a house. His house. Or rather, a distorted memory of it. The lighting was dim, sepia-toned, as if he were walking through an old photograph. The furniture, the sofa he'd just seen his mother sleeping on, the dining table, the television, was all shrouded in white dust covers, giving the room the look of a place long abandoned. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket that muffled even his own breathing. It was a silence born of absence, of waiting for a sound that would never come. A profound sense of loneliness permeated the space. It was the feeling of an empty nest, of a purpose fulfilled and now gone. He walked through the living room, his hand trailing along a shrouded armchair. The dust cover was cold, brittle. This was his mother's heart, a place once vibrant and full, now preserved under layers of quiet dread. He saw a door at the end of the hall, the door to his own childhood bedroom. It was the only thing in the house not covered in a sheet. It seemed to beckon him, a focal point in the muted landscape. He walked towards it, his footsteps making no sound on the thick carpet. He reached for the doorknob, a simple brass knob he'd touched 1,000 times. It was ice cold. He turned it, and pushed the door open. The room inside was his, but from a decade ago. The walls were covered in crayon drawings of a smiling All Might. A smaller bed was neatly made in the corner. Toys were arranged on a shelf with almost reverential care. And in the center of the room, sitting on a small round rug, was a boy. It was him. A 4-year-old Izuku, with his wild green hair and freckled cheeks, wearing his old All Might onesie. He wasn't playing. He was sitting perfectly still, his back to the door, his small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Izuku's heart cracked. This was it. This was the heart of the nightmare. "Hey!" he said softly. The little boy didn't turn around. His crying grew louder, raw and heartbroken. It was the sound Izuku himself had made the day he learned he was quirkless. He took a step into the room, and the door clicked shut behind him. He tried the knob. Locked. A prickle of unease ran down his spine. He turned back to the room. He had to help the crying child. He walked over and knelt beside him. "It's okay," he whispered, reaching out to touch his shoulder. "Everything's going to be okay." As his fingers made contact, the world lurched. The room dissolved, the colors bleeding away, and for a terrifying second, he was back in the hallway. He stood up, disoriented. The door to his room was closed again. The crying was coming from inside. He opened the door. The same scene. The crayon drawings, the small bed, the little boy crying in the center of the room. It was a loop. A prison made of a single, painful memory. Every door, every attempt to move forward, led right back here, to the moment her son's dream died. He tried again. He ran down the hall, to the front door of the apartment. He threw it open, desperate for an escape, for a way to break the cycle. He was standing in his childhood bedroom. The crying boy was right in front of him. The door slammed shut behind him. This was the nature of her fear. It was suffocating, inescapable. A maze of worry with only one destination, her fragile, quirkless son. No matter what she did, no matter where she looked, her anxiety always led her back to him, to this single, defining point of pain. "This has to stop," Izuku murmured, his voice firm. He was no longer just an observer. He was a participant. And he would not be trapped. He stood in the center of the room, ignoring the crying boy for a moment, and focused. He had helped Bakugo by empowering him. But his mother wasn't a fighter. He couldn't ask her to roar at her own fear. He had to do it for her. He had to find the source. That's when he felt it. A cold spot in the room. A presence. It was standing in the corner, near the toy shelf, almost perfectly camouflaged against the shadows. It was a tall, slender figure, vaguely humanoid but made of shifting, whispering darkness. It had no face, no features, just a vaguely person-shaped void that radiated a palpable aura of despair. It wasn't aggressive like Bakugo's monster. It was insidious. It leaned over the crying child, not touching him, but just being near him. And it whispered. The whispers were quiet, but they filled the room, weaving a tapestry of dread. "He's so fragile. He'll trip and fall. What if he gets sick? The world is so big and he's so small. They'll be cruel to him. He's not strong enough. He can't protect himself. He'll get hurt. He'll be left behind. He's too weak to survive." It was the litany of her anxiety, every worst-case scenario, every middle-of-the-night fear she'd ever had for him, given voice. It was the monster that kept her trapped in this loop, the jailer of her heart. The shadow figure seemed to notice him then. Its form coalesced, turning its featureless head toward him. The whispers shifted focus. "An intruder! You don't belong here. You'll only make it worse. You can't help. You are the source of the pain. You are the weakness." Izuku flinched. The words hit him like physical blows. This thing was a master of psychological warfare. It didn't need claws or teeth. It fought with the poison of doubt. But Izuku had a lifetime of experience with doubt. He had lived and breathed it. This was familiar territory. You're wrong, Izuku said, taking a step forward. The floorboards creaked under his weight. I'm not the weakness. I'm the reason she's strong. The shadow recoiled slightly, its form flickering. The whispers grew more frantic. Lies, you are the crack in her heart, the burden she must carry. You will be the end of her. No, Izuku said, his voice ringing with a conviction he hadn't known he possessed. You are the burden. You're the weight on her shoulders. And I'm here to take you off. He didn't know where the words were coming from, but they felt right. He wasn't just fighting for his mother anymore. He was fighting for himself, for the little boy crying on the floor. He charged. The shadow figure didn't move. It simply intensified its psychic assault. The whispers became a roar in his mind, a deafening chorus of failure and despair. Images flashed before his eyes, his mother weeping over his scraped knee, her face pale with terror when he had a fever, her silent tears the night he didn't get a quirk. All her pain, all her sorrow, weaponized against him. He staggered, clutching his head, the grief almost bringing him to his knees. But then he saw the little crying boy, his own past self, and a fierce, protective anger surged through him. Get away from him! He roared. He lunged forward, his hands outstretched, not to strike, but to grab. To hold. To contain. His fingers closed around the shifting darkness of the monster's form. The sensation was indescribable. It was like plunging his hands into a vat of ice-cold static. A million screaming, terrified thoughts rushed into him, a flood of pure, undiluted anxiety. It was overwhelming, a torrent of negativity that threatened to drown him. He felt his resolve waver. The monster was too strong. It was decades of fear, concentrated and refined. He couldn't beat it. He couldn't destroy it. The thought came to him then, an instinct born of desperation. If you can't beat it, join it. No. Not join it, consume it. He opened his mouth and did the most insane thing he had ever done in his life. He began to inhale. He didn't breathe with his lungs. He breathed with his soul. He pulled with a metaphysical force, drawing the fear into himself. The shadow monster shrieked, a sound of tearing fabric and breaking glass. It resisted, but Izuku's will was absolute. He was a drowning man pulling his rescuer under, a black hole drinking the light. The darkness flowed into him. It tasted of salt, of his mother's tears. It felt like a freezing river carving a new path through his insides, scouring him out, leaving a hollow, aching cold in its wake. The whispers became his own thoughts, a frantic, paranoid loop inside his own skull. Am I okay? Did I lock the door? What if I fall? The shadow figure thinned, its form being siphoned away. It grew transparent, its shrieks fading to a whimper. With one final, desperate pull, Izuku tore the last wisp of it from the dreamscape and swallowed it whole. It was gone. The room was silent. The oppressive cold vanished, replaced by a gentle, neutral warmth. The crying of the little boy had stopped. Izuku turned, his body trembling, feeling scoured out and empty. The 4-year-old version of him looked up, his big green eyes no longer filled with tears, but with a quiet, peaceful curiosity. He gave Izuku a small, hesitant smile. Then, he faded, dissolving like smoke, leaving only the clean, round rug behind. The room was brighter now. Sunlight, warm and golden, streamed through the window. The door swung open on its own, revealing not the looping hallway, but the rest of the apartment, now free of its dust covers. The furniture was vibrant, the colors rich. The air smelled of fresh laundry and green tea. He had done it. He had cleaned the house. A wave of exhaustion, more profound than any he had ever felt, crashed over him. His legs gave out, and the world dissolved into a gentle, dreamless white. He woke up slowly, feeling like he'd been pulled through a keyhole. His body ached, and a dull, throbbing headache pulsed behind his eyes. He was in his bed, the morning sun casting long shadows across his room. He felt hollow. Drained. Like a battery that had been completely depleted. A cheerful humming sound came from the kitchen. He stumbled out of his room, his legs unsteady. His mother was at the stove, making breakfast. She was swaying gently to a tune he didn't recognize, a bright, floral apron tied around her waist. She turned as he entered, and the smile that greeted him was one he hadn't seen in years. It was radiant. It reached her eyes, crinkling the corners, and it was free of the shadows that usually lurked there. She looked younger, lighter. The constant tension in her shoulders was gone. "Good morning, sweetie," she chirped, her voice clear and bright. "You're just in time. I'm trying a new recipe for tamagoyaki. I just felt like doing something different today." Izuku could only stare. The change was so stark it was like looking at a different person. She moved with a fluid, easy grace, her gestures confident. There was no fussing, no checking, no subtle tremor of anxiety. She brought him a plate, and as she set it down, she paused, tilting her head. "You know, I had the strangest dream last night," she said, her tone light and conversational. "I dreamt our house was so dusty and sad. And then, you were there. You cleaned it all up for me. It felt so real." She laughed, a sound like little bells. "When I woke up this morning I felt wonderful. Like a huge weight I didn't even know I was carrying is just gone. I feel so rested. So peaceful." She patted his cheek, her hand warm and steady. "Thank you for cleaning my dream, Izuku." She turned back to the stove, humming again, leaving Izuku sitting at the table in stunned silence. It had worked. It had worked better than he could have possibly imagined. He had taken her fear, and in its place left peace. A wave of pride and joy washed over him, so potent it almost made him dizzy. He was a hero. He had saved someone. The feeling of triumph carried him through the morning. He ate the delicious breakfast, listened to his mother's cheerful chatter, and felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the food. He had done a good thing. The exhaustion, the hollowness, they were a small price to pay for his mother's happiness. The price, he would soon learn, was far higher than he knew. That night, exhaustion claimed him early. He fell into bed, the memory of his mother's smiling face a comforting balm. He expected a deep, dreamless sleep, a well-earned rest after his psychic exertions. He was wrong. He didn't fall. He simply arrived. He was standing on a plush carpet that swallowed all sound. The air was still and close, smelling of dust and lavender. He was in a house. His mother's dream house. But it was his now. The furniture was covered in white sheets. The silence was absolute. The sense of oppressive loneliness was a heavy cloak on his shoulders. A cold, gnawing dread began to build in his stomach. This wasn't a memory. This was real. This was now. He walked to the door of his bedroom. The brass knob was freezing, burning his skin with its psychic cold. He opened it. The room was there. The crayon drawings, the small bed. But the crying boy was gone. The room was empty. Utterly, terrifyingly empty, and the whispers had returned. They didn't come from a corner. They came from everywhere. From the walls, from the floor, from inside his own head. And they weren't about a fragile little boy anymore. They were about him. "You're so fragile. You can't handle this power. What if you break? The world is so big and you're so small. What if you lose control? They'll find out. They'll call you a monster. You're not strong enough. You can't protect anyone. You'll get hurt. You'll be left behind. You're too weak to survive this." He stumbled back, clutching his head, a raw cry of anguish tearing from his throat. The fear he had stolen, the anxiety he had consumed, it wasn't gone. It hadn't been destroyed. It had been transferred. It had taken root in the hollow space inside him, and now it was his. He had taken his mother's burden, and in doing so, had shackled it to his own soul. He was trapped in the empty house of her fear, the looping nightmare now his own personal prison. He ran, throwing open door after door, but each one led back to the same empty room, the same tormenting whispers. There was no shadow monster to fight. The monster was inside him now. He collapsed on the floor, curling into a ball, the whispers a relentless tide threatening to pull him under. He had saved his mother. He had given her peace. But the cost was his own sanity. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow, a cold, hard truth in the heart of his new nightmare. To be a hero who saves people from their inner demons, he would have to become a museum of them. He would have to build a prison within his own mind and become its solitary inmate. He lay there, trembling in the dark, the weight of his mother's worry crushing him. And through the terror, through the despair, a single, defiant thought burned with a cold, fierce light. It was worth it. He would do it again. He would bear this. He would take on all the nightmares of the world if he had to. This was the price of his heroism, and he would pay it. The days that followed the first theft were a strange and discordant symphony. By day, Izuku lived in the warm, bright melody of his mother's newfound happiness. Inko Midoriya was a woman reborn. She hummed as she cooked, she took up gardening on their small balcony, she laughed with an easy, unrestrained joy that made their tiny apartment feel vast and full of light. She was everything he had ever wanted her to be, happy, peaceful, and free. Every guiltless smile she gave him was a victory, a confirmation that he had done the right thing. He was her hero. But when the sun set, the music changed. The symphony plunged into a dark, minor key. Sleep was no longer a refuge. It was a shift change. As soon as his consciousness slipped, he was on duty. He would arrive, not with a fall, but with a weary sense of inevitability, into the cold, silent, sepia-toned house of his mother's fear. It was his now. The shrouded furniture, the lonely silence, the endless, looping hallway that always led back to his own empty, childhood bedroom. This was his mental landscape. The whispers were the worst part. They were his constant companions in the dark, a poisoned chorus stitched together from every anxiety his mother had ever felt for him, now repurposed and aimed directly at his own heart. You can't control this. What if you hurt someone? What if you enter the wrong dream? They'll call you a villain, a psychic parasite. You're too weak to carry this burden. He learned to endure it. He would walk the lonely halls of his mind, the whispers curling around him like smoke, and he would simply walk. He couldn't fight them, because they were a part of him now. He couldn't run, because this place was the very architecture of his subconscious. So he walked, and he endured, and he waited for morning. He would wake up feeling as though he'd run a marathon in his sleep, a profound exhaustion clinging to his bones. Dark circles, like bruises, bloomed beneath his eyes. He was perpetually tired, but he hid it behind a strained smile. The sight of his mother, watering her new petunias without a single cloud of worry on her brow, made it all worth it. It was a price, he told himself. Every hero paid a price. All Might fought through grievous injuries. Endeavor sacrificed his family for power. His price was paid in stolen fear and sleepless nights. He would bear it. It was on one such day, walking home from school in a haze of fatigue, that his life tilted on its axis once more. He was taking a familiar shortcut, an underpass that was always cool and dim, when a familiar voice, sharp and angry, cut through his thoughts. Don't you ever talk to me like that again, you useless nerd! He looked up. It was Bakugo, flanked by his two lackeys. He'd been unusually subdued since the nightmare incident, but it seemed his quiet introspection had reached its limit. Just because you got lucky on the mock exam, you think you can look down on me? Bakugo snarled, kicking a plastic bottle against the concrete wall. Stay in your lane, Deku. A quirkless reject like you doesn't even get to be on the same road as me. Izuku flinched, but the words didn't have their usual sting. He had faced down the very personification of Bakugo's deepest insecurity. He knew the terrified child that hid beneath the rage. He felt a strange pain of pity, not fear. I wasn't looking down on you, Kaken, he said, his voice quiet but steady. Then what was that look? Bakugo demanded, getting in his face. The scent of caramel and burnt sugar filled the air. That pathetic, pitying look. You think you're better than me? Before Izuku could answer, a gurgling, unnatural sound echoed from the sewer grate behind Bakugo. The metal cover rattled and then shot into the air. A monstrous wave of green, viscous sludge erupted from the manhole, a grotesque tsunami of filth with two massive, cartoonish eyes floating within it. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. The sludge monster gurgled, its voice a wet, sucking sound. Bakugo and his friends froze, their bravado evaporating in an instant. The monster lunged, not at Bakugo, but at the smallest, most non-threatening target. It lunged at Izuku. Time seemed to slow down. Izuku saw the wave of sentient sewage coming, smelled the stench of rot and decay, and his mind went into overdrive. He couldn't fight this. He couldn't run. He was going to die, and then, a blur of red, white and blue. "Have no fear, for I am here." The voice was like a thunderclap and a church choir all at once. All Might, in the flesh, landed between Izuku and the monster. He was bigger than on television, a living mountain of muscle and optimism. Texas Smash! All Might threw a single punch. It didn't even connect. The sheer force of the wind pressure it generated was enough. The air itself became a battering ram. The sludge villain was blasted apart, its liquid form splattering against the walls of the underpass in 1,000 tiny, inert droplets. Izuku could only stare, breathless. His hero. His idol. Right there. All Might quickly, efficiently, scooped the villain's remains into a large soda bottle. All Might," Izuku stammered, fumbling for his burnt, waterlogged notebook. "See, can I have your autograph?" All Might, ever the professional, gave a booming laugh and signed the notebook with a flourish. "Of course, young man! Thank you for your support. Now, I must be off. Pros are always battling villains in time." He crouched, preparing to leap away. But Izuku's mind was a maelstrom. The whispers from his nightly torment were there, screaming at him. "You're weak. You're nothing." But the sight of All Might, the raw power of true heroism, sparked a desperate, insane hope. He had to know. He had to ask. As All Might launched himself into the air, Izuku did the stupidest, most reckless thing he had ever done. He grabbed onto the hero's leg. The flight was terrifying, a blur of wind and cityscape. They landed hard on a nearby rooftop, All Might looking more annoyed than anything. "Young man, that was incredibly reckless. I love my fans, but there's a limit," he scolded, and then his body was enveloped in a cloud of steam. When it cleared, the giant hero was gone. In his place stood a skeletal man who looked like he would be knocked over by a stiff breeze. His suit hung off his emaciated frame, and blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. Izuku stared in horror. It was a sight more shocking than the sludge villain. This frail, sick man was All Might? Toshinori Yagi, weary and pained, explained his injury, the 5-year-old battle that had cost him his stomach and limited his hero time. He showed Izuku the gruesome, crater-like scar on his torso. It was a secret, he explained, that could shatter the fragile peace he represented. "A hero must always be ready to risk his life," All Might said, his voice quiet and heavy. "But there are some wounds that even courage can't heal. So no, I don't think you can become a hero without a quirk." The words were a hammer blow. Izuku had heard it his whole life, from doctors, from teachers, from Bakugo. But hearing it from his idol, from the symbol of peace himself, shattered the last vestiges of his hope. It was a definitive, final judgment. Tears welled in his eyes. The exhaustion from his sleepless nights, the constant mental strain of his quirk, the crushing weight of his mother's stolen fear, it all came crashing down on him at once. He was a fraud. His quirk wasn't a hero's power, it was a curse, a self-destructive engine of pain that he couldn't even use to fight. It was useless. He was useless. Even if I don't have a power that can punch things?" Izuku asked, his voice cracking, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "Even if my quirk only hurts me?" All Might frowned, confused. "Hurts you? Young man, you just said you were quirkless." "I thought I was," Izuku cried, the dam of his composure breaking completely. "I was diagnosed quirkless. But I have something. It's not for fighting villains in the street. It's for fighting the ones inside your head." The words poured out of him in a desperate, frantic torrent. He told All Might everything. About the dream with Bakugo, about the shadow monster made of fear, about helping him fight it. He told him about his mother, about the suffocating worry that was killing her, about entering her mind and seeing the prison she'd built for herself. "I fought it," Izuku said, sobbing now, scrubbing at his tears with a clenched fist. This thing made of her fear. I couldn't beat it. So I stole it. I pulled it into me, and now she's happy, All Might. She's happy and she's safe from it. But I'm not. Every night, I live in her nightmare. Every night, the whispers tell me I'm too weak, too fragile, that I'll get hurt. But I did it. I saved her. Isn't that what a hero does? He looked up at All Might, his eyes pleading, his face a mess of tears and desperation. So please, tell me, can someone with a quirk that only lets them get hurt, can someone who saves people by taking on their pain, can he be a hero like you? All Might was silent. He stared at the trembling boy before him, and his expression was one of absolute, stunned shock. The skeletal hero looked at Izuku not as a fanboy, but as a phenomenon. He saw the sleepless nights in the boy's eyes, the bone-deep weariness of someone carrying an invisible, crushing weight. He saw the raw, reckless, self-sacrificial spirit that was the very core of heroism. He had told the boy no. But this changed everything. A hero who could heal wounds no one else could see. A hero who could fight the trauma, the PTSD, the deep-seated fears that ended careers and ruined lives long after the physical battles were over. It was a power of unimaginable potential. An unimaginable danger. You saved her. All Might murmured, a look of profound awe on his face. He looked at his own scarred torso, at the evidence of his own limitations. You took her burden upon yourself, without a thought for the cost. He looked back at Izuku, and for the first time, he saw not a quirkless child, but a successor. Young man, he said, his voice filled with a new, powerful emotion. I have been looking for someone to inherit my power. A person with a true hero's heart. I believe I have found him. He held out a hand. Your quirk is noble, but it is also a poison. It will destroy you if you bear it alone. My quirk, one for all, is a sacred torch, passed down from one generation to the next. It is the crystallization of power, meant to fight evil. But it is more than that. It is a legacy of wills. It will give you the strength to fight on the outside, and the fortitude to withstand the darkness on the inside. He smiled, a true, warm smile that had nothing to do with the cameras. You can become a hero. And I will help you. The 10 months that followed were a blur of pain, sweat and rust. All Might's American dream plan was brutal. Izuku hauled refrigerators, pulled trucks, and slowly, painstakingly, cleared an entire beach of decades of illegally dumped trash. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest. He collapsed into bed each night, his body a canvas of aches, only to fall immediately into the cold, whispering prison of his mother's fear. The physical exhaustion and the mental torment fed off each other. The whispers in his dream grew louder, feeding on his physical fatigue. You're going to fail, you can't do it, your body will break, you're not worthy. But now, something was different. He had hope. He had a goal. All Might's words echoed louder than the whispers. You can become a hero. He clung to that promise like a drowning man to a life raft. The burn in his muscles was proof of his progress. The mountain of trash shrinking day by day was a testament to his will. Finally, on the morning of the UA entrance exam, he stood atop the completely cleared Dagoba beach, the rising sun glinting off the clean sand. He was no longer the scrawny, trembling boy from the rooftop. He was lean, wiry, with a core of strength he'd never known. All Might, in his hero form, stood before him, beaming. Excellent work, my boy! You did it! You are a worthy vessel! He plucked a single hair from his head. Now, he said, holding it out. For the final step, he looked at Izuku's dumbfounded expression. Eat this. It was, without a doubt, the strangest and most disgusting thing Izuku had ever done. He choked down the strand of hair, his mind rebelling against the sheer absurdity of it. He felt nothing. A profound sense of anticlimax washed over him. Is that it? He asked, bewildered. The transfer takes time to digest and settle. All Might explained. Now hurry! The exam starts soon. Go and make this power your own. Izuku ran the UA exam in a daze. He felt no surge of power, no new strength. When he tried to fight the robots, he only saw his own fragility. He was about to fail, to let everyone down, when he saw the girl with the brown hair trapped under the rubble, the massive zero-pointer looming over her. His body moved before his mind could think. He didn't think about his quirk, about one for all, about a strategy. He only thought about saving her. He channeled every ounce of his training, every bit of his desperation, and leaped. and the world exploded in green lightning. The power of One for All surged through him, a cataclysmic force that shattered his arm and his legs but also turned the zero-pointer into a twisted wreck of scrap metal. He had done it. He had used his quirk. He spent the next week in recovery, his body mending, his mind reeling. He had passed. He was going to UA. But the power felt alien, a borrowed, uncontrollable force that destroyed him every time he used it. And at night, his dreams were still the same cold, lonely prison. One for All had given him power, but it hadn't saved him from the whispers. On the night before his first day at UA, he fell into an exhausted sleep, bracing himself for the familiar torment. He prepared for the sepia tones, the dust covers, the suffocating silence. But he did not arrive in the house. He landed on a floor of polished obsidian, so black it seemed to swallow the very concept of light. He looked up, and his breath caught in his throat. He was in a vast, cavernous space, impossibly huge. The ceiling was lost in a swirling nebula of shadow and faint, pulsing light. The walls were sheer, crystalline black, etched with glowing, emerald-green lines that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic energy, like the circulatory system of a god. The air was cool and still, humming with a power so immense it made the hair on his arms stand up. It felt ancient, powerful, and utterly indestructible. This was not the fragile, decaying house of fear. This was a fortress. A vault. In the center of the vast chamber, where his mother's fear had once been an all-consuming environment, there was now a single, solitary door. It was made of dull, gray iron, and it was sealed shut with a heavy, complex-looking lock. The whispers were still there, but they weren't all around him anymore. They were coming from behind that door, faint and muffled, like a distant storm. The fear wasn't gone. It was contained. Impressive, isn't it? The voice was female, warm and clear, with an undercurrent of strength. Izuku spun around. Standing a few feet away was a woman with dark, spiky hair and a kind, knowing smile. She wore a simple, sleeveless hero costume, and a small mole rested under her lip. A faint, ethereal light seemed to emanate from her. She was a ghost, a memory, but she felt more solid than anything in the waking world. You're Nana Shimura, Izuku breathed, recognizing her from old hero archives. All Might's mentor. The seventh holder of One for All, she smiled. In a manner of speaking, we are the vestiges of One for All. The echoes of those who came before you, imprinted upon the quirk. As she spoke, other figures began to fade into existence around her, coalescing from the swirling shadows. There was a stern-looking man with white hair and piercing eyes, his arms crossed, his gaze intense. Another, beside him, was scarred and grim, radiating an aura of disciplined, weary combat. A third man looked mournful, his shoulders slumped, a deep sadness in his spectral eyes. One by one they appeared, a silent council of ghosts. What is this place? Izuku asked, his voice a whisper of awe and terror. Where am I? You are within yourself, ninth, said the stern man with white hair, his voice a low rasp. Izuku recognized him as the second user. You are within the heart of One for All. This is the Nexus. The vault. Nana Shimura stepped forward, her expression gentle but serious. One for All is more than just a power you wield. It is a living thing, a legacy of will. When you accepted it, it accepted you. It felt the intruder you were carrying, the psychic parasite you stole. She gestured to the sealed iron door. Your quirk, Oneiros, makes your mind a doorway. One for All has fortified that doorway. It has taken the fear you absorbed and built a prison for it. It has created this vault, to protect you. To keep the nightmares you steal from consuming you. Izuku stared at the door, at the lock. He could feel the cold anxiety seeping from it, but it was contained, controlled. The whispers were manageable now, no longer a flood but a trickle. And you? Izuku asked, looking at the assembled vestiges. What are you, if this is a prison? Said the scarred third user, his voice rough as gravel. Then think of us as the wardens. Nana Shimura placed a ghostly hand on Izuku's shoulder. The touch was cool but reassuring. We are the guardians of your mind, young one. We exist within the quirk, a council of experience. We will help you control One for All. And we will help you manage the inmates you collect with Oneiros. We will be your teachers, your advisors, and your first line of defense against the darkness you invite inside. Izuku looked from Nana's kind face to the stoic visages of the other holders. He looked at the vast, fortified vault around him. He finally looked at the sealed iron door, the first of what he now knew could be many. The fear was still there, a permanent resident in the core of his soul, but it was no longer his master. He was its warden. A profound sense of purpose settled over him, calming the frantic beating of his heart. He wasn't alone in this anymore. He had allies. He had strength. He had a shield. Nana Shimura's smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of solemn gravity. She looked him directly in the eye, her gaze piercing, ensuring he understood the weight of his new reality. But you must understand the path you have chosen, Izuku Midoriya, she said, her voice dropping to a serious, resonant tone. This vault is strong, but it is not infinite. Every fear you steal, every nightmare you consume to save another soul, will be brought here. It will be given a cell. It will be given a lock. She pointed to the single iron door, and then gestured to the vast, empty expanse of the obsidian floor. Every soul you save will add another lock to your own. This is the price of your heroism. Izuku met her gaze, unflinching. He saw the truth in her words, the lifetime of psychic imprisonment that lay before him. He saw the path lined with the monsters of other people's minds, a collection of horrors he would have to carry forever, and he felt no fear. Only resolve. He had been given a second chance. A power to save, and a power to endure. He was no longer just a boy who dreamt of nightmares. He was their keeper. He nodded, accepting the terms of his new existence. I understand. He was Izuku Midoriya, the ninth holder of One for All. The hero of dreams, and the warden of the vault. His first day at Yui was tomorrow, and for the first time in a long time, he felt ready. The air at Yui High School was different. It wasn't just clean, it was electric. It hummed with the concentrated energy of 180 extraordinary teenagers, each one a potential legend, a future headline, a spark ready to ignite. For Izuku, after a lifetime of breathing the stale air of mediocrity at Aldera, it was like taking his first breath on a new planet. He felt small and out of place, a terrestrial creature suddenly dropped into an ocean of aerialists. But he was here. He belonged. The acceptance letter had said so. All Might had said so. His new quirk, or rather, his two quirks, intertwined like a double helix of fate, made him an anomaly even among anomalies. During Aizawa-sensei's grueling quirk apprehension test, he'd managed to channel One for All into the tip of his finger, a desperate, last-ditch effort to prove he wasn't a one-shot wonder. The resulting throw shattered his finger but saved him from last place, earning him a grudging nod from his perpetually exhausted teacher. The pain was excruciating, but it was a clean, physical pain. It was a relief compared to the psychic ache that was his constant companion. He quickly learned that Class 1A was a microcosm of the hero world itself, a dazzling, chaotic, and sometimes terrifying collection of powers and personalities. There was Ida Tenya, whose engine-powered discipline was as rigid as his posture. There was the explosive, ever-present challenge of Bakugo, who regarded Izuku with a new, simmering mixture of fury and confused resentment. And there was Uraraka Ochako, the bubbly, kind-hearted girl he had saved, whose zero-gravity quirk seemed a perfect match for her light, effervescent spirit. It was Uraraka who became his first willing test subject. They were sitting in the bustling cafeteria a few weeks into the term. Izuku was picking at his food, the dark circles under his eyes a permanent feature of his face now. He had been spending his nights in the vault, with Nana Shimura and the other vestiges. They were teaching him, not just how to manage the raw, destructive power of One for All, but also how to fortify the walls of his own mind. The second and third users, hardened warriors from a darker era of heroics, were relentless in their psychic drills, forcing him to build mental shields, to recognize weak points in his own psyche, to treat his subconscious not as a safe space, but as a battlefield to be defended. Deku-kun? Are you okay? Uraraka's voice, full of genuine concern, cut through his thoughts. You look like you haven't slept in a week. Izuku flinched. The truth was, he hadn't truly rested since the night he stole his mother's fear. Sleep was just work of a different kind. I'm fine, he lied, forcing a smile. Just a lot to think about. Is it about your quirk? She asked, leaning in conspiratorially. It's amazing, but it seems to really hurt you. I'm worried. Her brow furrowed, and in that simple expression of concern, Izuku saw an opportunity. He saw a chance to do good, to practice, to be the kind of hero he now knew he was meant to be. He took a deep breath. The vestiges had warned him. Do not offer this lightly, Ninth. The minds of others are not your training ground, but the urge to help, to unburden someone else, was a compulsion as strong as one for all. Uraraka-san, he began, his voice low and serious. My quirk, it's more complicated than it looks. The strength is part of it, but there's another side to it, a side that can help with things other than fighting. She looked at him, her round, brown eyes full of curiosity. What do you mean? I can help with worries, he said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. With fears. The kind that keep you up at night. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a recognition, a hidden anxiety she tried to keep behind her cheerful smile. He pressed on gently. I know you're worried about your family, about the reason you want to be a hero for money. Uraraka's cheerful demeanor crumbled. She looked down at her hands, her expression suddenly vulnerable. My parents, their construction business isn't doing well. They work so hard, but they never seem to get ahead. I just want to earn a lot of money so I can give them an easy life. But what if I can't? What if I fail, and they have to keep struggling because of me? Sometimes, it feels like so much pressure I can't breathe. It was a fear born of love, just like his mother's. Familiar territory. I can help, Izuku said, his voice gaining confidence. If you'll let me. I need your consent. And I need to make physical contact to create a link. But I can go into your dream and I can take that fear away. She stared at him, her expression a cocktail of disbelief, hope, and trepidation. You can enter my dreams? Like for real? For real, he confirmed. I did it for my mom. It helped her. Uraraka was silent for a long moment, weighing the sheer strangeness of his offer against the heavy weight on her shoulders. Finally, she looked at him, her gaze firm with resolve. Okay, she said. I trust you, Deku-kun. Let's do it. That night, Izuku lay in his bed in the newly constructed Alliance Heights dorms, a building that hummed with the sleeping minds of his classmates. He had held Uraraka's hand for a few seconds after dinner, a brief, warm contact that established the silvery thread of a link. Now, he closed his eyes, focused on that link, and let himself sink. He arrived not in a house, but on a half-finished construction site under a stormy, bruised purple sky. The wind howled, whipping dust and debris through the air. In the center of the site stood a house, Uraraka's house, but it was a skeletal frame of wood and steel, unfinished and vulnerable. As he watched, the structure groaned under the force of the wind. A beam cracked. A wall began to tremble. He saw Uraraka, in her hero costume, desperately trying to hold it all together. She would use her quirk to make a heavy girder weightless, straining to guide it back into place. But as soon as she fixed one part, another would break. Her parents stood nearby, their faces etched with despair, their forms transparent and flickering, as if they were fading away. The fear was a tangible force, a relentless gale threatening to tear down everything she was trying to build. Izuku understood. This was the fear of failure, the terror that her efforts wouldn't be enough to stop her family's world from collapsing. He didn't hesitate. He walked into the heart of the storm. He found the source of the wind, a swirling vortex of black cloud at the edge of the site, whispering her insecurities. You're not strong enough, you'll drop them, it's all on you. This time, he didn't fight it head-on. He remembered the lessons from the vestiges. A warden does not always use brute force. Sometimes you must redirect, reinforce. He didn't steal the storm. Instead, he became a shield. He stood before the house, planting his feet, and visualized a wall of green energy, the very essence of One for All's protective power. The wind slammed against his mental shield, but it held. He was providing cover, giving Uraraka the breathing room she needed. In the dream, she looked up, surprised, and saw him. He gave her a determined nod. Empowered, she worked faster, her movements sure and confident. She secured the last beam just as Izuku's shield began to crack under the strain. The storm, its purpose thwarted, dissipated with a final, mournful howl. The sky cleared. The sun came out. The house stood, solid and complete. He woke up feeling drained, but not hollowed out. He hadn't absorbed the fear, merely deflected it and allowed Uraraka to conquer it herself. It was a new technique, less costly to him. The next morning Uraraka was glowing. Deku-kun! It worked! I feel so light! The pressure is still there, but it's not scary anymore. It's just a goal. Thank you, he had done it. He was learning. He could be a hero who empowers, not just one who absorbs. His success with Uraraka gave him a surge of confidence. He helped Kirishima next, entering a dream of a desolate proving ground where his body, instead of hardening, would shatter like glass every time he was struck. Izuku didn't steal the fear. He simply stood beside his friend in the dream, taking the first blow himself, a phantom pain that was nothing compared to a broken finger, and showing Kirishima that his spirit was stronger than his skin. He was getting good at this. He was helping his friends, controlling his power, and truly feeling like a hero for the first time. The whispers in his own mind were still there, locked behind their iron door, but their power over him was diminished. His confidence, however, was about to lead him to his greatest mistake. Shoto Todoroki was an island. In the boisterous, chaotic ocean of Class 1A, he was a silent, unmoving landmass of ice and smoldering fire. He spoke little, interacted less, and carried himself with an aura of cold, detached fury that kept everyone at a distance. Izuku, with his newfound sensitivity to the emotional undercurrents of others, felt the sheer, oppressive weight of Todoroki's psyche like a drop in barometric pressure. It was a constant, low-grade storm front in any room he occupied. Izuku watched him. He saw the way Todoroki refused to use his left side, the flames he could summon, even when it put him at a disadvantage in training. He saw the raw, untempered hatred in his eyes whenever his father, the number 2 hero endeavor, was mentioned. He saw the scar that marred the left side of his face, a permanent, physical reminder of a pain he never spoke of. It was more than just fear. It was trauma. Deep, complex, and festering. The urge to help was a physical ache in Izuku's chest. Here was a pain so profound, so all-consuming, that it was shaping every aspect of Todoroki's life. If he could just lift a fraction of that, if he could just ease that burden, what a heroic act that would be. He approached Todoroki after a particularly brutal combat training session where Todoroki had won, but only by encasing himself and his opponent in a massive, uncontrolled glacier, earning a sharp reprimand from Aizawa. "Todoroki-kun," Izuku began, his heart pounding. He felt like he was approaching a slumbering volcano. Todoroki turned his heterochromatic eyes on him, his gaze cold and dismissive. "What do you want, Midoriya? I know it's none of my business," Izuku stammered. "But I can see that you're in a lot of pain. The way you use your quirk, it's like you're fighting yourself as much as you're fighting your opponent." A flicker of something dangerous sparked in Todoroki's eyes. "You know nothing about me. I know what it's like to have a complicated quirk," Izuku pressed, desperate to make a connection. "And I know what it's like to be haunted by things. My power, it's not just about strength. I can help with the other things. With nightmares." He laid it all out, the same offer he had made to Uraraka, but this time it felt different. The stakes were infinitely higher. He was offering to step into a minefield. Todoroki's expression didn't change, but a profound stillness came over him. He stared at Izuku, his gaze analytical, searching. He was a boy drowning, and someone had just thrown him a line. It might be a trick, it might be a trap, but it was a line. The desperation that he kept locked behind a wall of ice was so immense that he was willing to grasp at anything. "You can take away nightmares?" he asked, his voice a low, flat monotone that betrayed none of the turmoil Izuku could feel churning beneath the surface. "I can try," Izuku said honestly. "I can take away the fear." Todoroki was silent for a full minute. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken history. Finally, he gave a single, sharp nod. "Fine," he said. "Do it." He held out his hand, a clear, clinical invitation. Izuku's own hand was trembling as he reached out and clasped Todoroki's. The contact was a cataclysm. It wasn't a gentle thread of a link. It was a psychic explosion. A wave of pure, unadulterated agony slammed into Izuku, so powerful it made him stagger. He was hit with a blast of searing heat and a wave of absolute, soul-crushing cold simultaneously. He felt a phantom pain sear across the left side of his own face. For a terrifying second, he heard a man's bellowing, furious voice and a woman's terrified scream echoing in his mind. He wrenched his hand back as if burned, gasping. "Todoroki-kun, you said you could help," Todoroki said, his voice cold, but his eyes held a desperate, pleading vulnerability that was horrifying to behold. Do it! Izuku had crossed the line. He couldn't back out now. That night, he felt a genuine, gut-wrenching fear as he lay in his bed. The link to Todoroki wasn't a thin thread. It was a thick, volatile power cable, crackling with dangerous energy. "Ninth, this is unwise," Nana Shimura's voice echoed in his mind as he prepared to sleep. "You have only faced simple anxieties. This is a chasm. This is a wound that has never been allowed to heal. You are not ready. I have to try." Izuku thought back, his resolve firm. He asked for my help. He closed his eyes and plunged into the abyss. There was no soft landing. He crashed into the dreamscape with the force of a meteor, the impact jarring his psychic senses. He was standing in a Japanese-style home, a traditional training dojo with tatami mats and shoji screen walls. But it was a place of horrors. On his right side, the entire world was frozen solid. The walls, the floor, the air itself were coated in a thick, jagged layer of ice. The cold was absolute, a dead cold that didn't just chill the skin but seemed to freeze the very marrow in his bones. It leached all warmth, all emotion, all hope. It was the cold of absolute loneliness and repudiation. On his left side, the dojo was an inferno. Flames, brilliant and roaring, consumed everything. The wooden walls were charred black, the air shimmered with heat, and the tatami mats smoldered. The heat was a living thing, an oppressive, suffocating blanket of rage and pressure. It was the heat of ambition, of abuse, of a father's monstrous expectations. The two elements met in a violent, hissing line down the exact center of the room, a perpetual, violent war between fire and ice. This wasn't a dreamscape. It was a battlefield. And looming over it all, a colossal, terrifying presence was the source. It was a giant, shadowy effigy of endeavor. It was 20 feet tall, its body wreathed in roaring black flames, its face a mask of furious disappointment. But its left side, the side corresponding to the ice, was a void. It was an empty space, a hole in reality, representing the sun he wanted but didn't get. Its presence was the source of both the suffocating heat and the deadening cold. In the center of the room, trapped on the line where fire met ice, stood Shoto Todoroki. He was a child, no older than 5, one side of his body shivering violently while the other was slick with sweat. He was trapped between the two extremes, unable to move, his small face a mask of silent, hopeless terror. Izuku felt a surge of horror and pity so strong it almost buckled his knees. This wasn't a simple fear monster like the one in Bakugo's dream. This was a psychic monument to years of systematic trauma. Nana was right. He was out of his depth. "Todoroki-kun!" he called out. The child didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the towering shadow of his father. The Endeavor Spectre's burning eyes turned, locking onto Izuku. "Another failure?" It boomed, its voice the sound of a forest fire. "Weak. Useless. You are not Shoto. You are a flaw to be burned away." The inferno on the left side of the room surged, a wave of psychic fire washing over Izuku. The pain was real. He screamed, his dream self feeling the searing agony of being burned alive. He threw himself to the right, into the frozen wasteland, and the relief was just as agonizing. The cold sank its teeth into him, a pain that was sharp and brittle, feeling as though his blood were turning to ice crystals. He was trapped, just like the child Todoroki. He couldn't stay in the fire, and he couldn't stay in the ice. The only space was the warring border between them, and it was tearing him apart. "Ninth, get out! Now!" The second user's voice roared in his mind. "This psyche is too strong! It will annihilate you! I can't leave him! Izuku screamed back, both in the dream and thrashing in his bed in the real world. He tried to approach the child, but the warring elements were too powerful. He was being simultaneously incinerated and flash-frozen. The nightmare wasn't just a manifestation of fear. It was an active defense mechanism, a psychic fortress designed to keep everyone out. He had to steal the fear. He had to absorb the monster. It was the only way. He channeled the memory of stealing his mother's fear, that feeling of a psychic black hole. He opened his mind, his soul, and tried to pull at the Endeavor Spectre. It was like trying to drink the ocean. The sheer volume of rage, pain, grief, and hatred that flowed from the spectre was a tsunami. It slammed into him, overloading his senses instantly. He got a flash of a memory, a screaming woman, a boiling kettle, a child's cry of agony. He felt the sting of a palm striking his face, the crushing weight of a father's hand on his shoulder, forcing him down. He tasted his own blood. The spectre laughed, a sound of grinding metal and roaring flames. You think you can take my legacy? My masterpiece of hate? You will break first. The nightmare began to actively consume him. The fire and ice surged, not just around him, but into him. He felt his own mind being ripped in two. The left side of his body felt like it was on fire, while the right was encased in ice. The pain was beyond anything he had ever imagined, a metaphysical agony that transcended the physical. He was losing. The dream was eating him alive. That's enough! Nana Shimura's voice was a clarion call in the chaos. All of you! Pull him out! Now! In the depths of the vault, the vestiges acted. They grabbed hold of Izuku's consciousness, their combined will a powerful anchor. They pulled. It felt like being ripped out of concrete. The nightmare resisted, its tendrils of fire and ice clinging to him, refusing to let go of its new victim. There was a sound like a tearing rope, and Izuku's consciousness snapped back, violently ejected from the dreamscape. He woke up with a scream that tore his throat raw. He wasn't in his bed. He was on the floor, his body convulsing. The left side of his body was beet red, covered in sweat, and felt dangerously hot to the touch. The right side was pale, clammy, and frighteningly cold. A thin layer of actual frost was crystallizing on his right hand, while a wisp of steam rose from his left. His door burst open. Aizawa was there, his capture weapon already unwound, his eyes wide with alarm behind his goggles. All Might, in his skeletal form, was right behind him, his face a mask of terror. Midoriya, my boy! All Might cried, rushing to his side. Izuku could only gasp, his body a war zone of opposing temperatures. He looked at his hands, one steaming, one freezing, and the horror of what had happened crashed over him. The psychic backlash had manifested physically. The nightmare had wounded him, leaving its scars on his very flesh. Todoroki! He choked out, his teeth chattering from both cold and shock. His mind, it's too strong. I couldn't. I failed. Aizawa's expression was grim as he knelt, his hand hovering over Izuku's forehead, feeling the bizarre temperature differential. You didn't just fail, kid. You almost got yourself killed. He looked at All Might, his gaze sharp and accusatory. This is what you've been training him for? To perform psychic lobotomies? I knew his quirk was self-destructive, but this is a new level of reckless. It was not my intention. All Might began, but Aizawa cut him off. He's your student, All Might. And he's my student. And right now, he's a danger to himself, Aizawa said, his voice dangerously low. He looked back at Izuku, his usual apathy replaced by a stern, protective intensity. Midoriya, your quirk is not to be used on other students. Not ever again. Not without my express permission and supervision. Is that understood? Izuku, shivering and burning on the floor, could only nod, shame and failure washing over him in a sickening wave. He had learned his most critical lesson yet. He was not a god. He was not a savior who could simply walk into the darkest parts of a person's soul and switch off the pain. Some nightmares were not just fears. They were foundational traumas, integral parts of a person's identity, carved into them by years of suffering. They were too powerful, too rooted, too vast to be stolen, and trying to do so was not just heroic. It was suicidal. He looked at his hands, one scarred by ice, the other by fire, and knew he would carry the proof of his failure forever. He had tried to enter the heart of his friend's storm, and he had been broken by it.